an assembled cast of screen legends, motion picture studio bosses, villains and crooks, set in Tinseltown's golden age, not to mention a supporting cast of corrupt cops and shady politicians. Almost 90 years have elapsed since the death of tragic movie star goddess Thelma Todd, nicknamed the Ice Cream Blonde or Hot Toddy, who was found slumped in the front seat of her huge Lincoln Phaeton convertible at a friend's garage. The scene that greeted the movie star's maid on a December morning in 1935 in the fashionable Pacific Palisades neighbourhood of Malibu would inspire numerous books, films and documentaries in the years that followed. Was it suicide, murder or an accident? Let's face it, who doesn't love a good mystery? The official verdict of the coroner's inquest found Todd's death to be an accident, but recommended further investigation by a grand jury. The grand jury, following weeks of deliberation, found no evidence of foul play and agreed with the accident conclusion. But despite this verdict, and after theories from almost every newspaper that followed the case, are we any closer to finding out what really happened? And what is my interest in Thelma Todd? Why am I, a former newspaper reporter from Ireland, about to chip in with my theories?
Okay, this is the Pacific Coast Highway. This building here is 17575 Pacific Coast Highway. And why are we here? Well, it's sort of interesting to me, and it's a bit of a story. When I worked as a journalist back in Ireland, I was sitting in my office one day, and not much happens. It was a little provincial newspaper called Newtonards Chronicle. So the phone rings this day, and somebody said, "It's the Sons of the Desert. They want to speak to someone." I said, "Sons of the Desert?"
As a big Laurel and Hardy fan, I knew exactly who the Sons of the Desert were. This was a worldwide fan club for the biggest comedy duo in cinema history.
So I spoke to them, and they said, "We're trying to trace relatives of Thelma Todd." Now, this is Thelma Todd's sidewalk cafe, it used to be. And so what they wanted to do was bring one of the relatives from Newtonards, or actually Cumber. Thelma's dad was from Cumber, which is about 5 miles outside Belfast. And he came here, and his daughter, Thelma Todd, became a movie actress. And she set up this sidewalk cafe at this building here.
So, who exactly was Thelma Todd? Well, she appeared in over 120 movies back in the day when Hollywood was transitioning from the silent era to the talkies. The movie industry was reeling from the huge cost of renovating studio sets and the tricky technology of introducing sound to millions of moviegoers in theatres all over the world. Todd, formerly a school teacher from the town of Lawrence in Essex County, Massachusetts, was a natural.
Wait a minute. You and I have got something to talk about.
I'll see you later.
Not later.
All right, what is it? Let's have it.
I thought you might be interested to know I'm becoming ambitious.
Unlike many stars whose careers were ruined when it was discovered they had either an accent, or speech impediment, or tonal quality unsuitable for the job, as was the case of matinee idol John Gilbert. Thelma's dad, John Shaw Todd, was a successful businessman and town councillor. John Todd and his wife Alice, who was from Canada, followed their daughter's success even to New York, where sadly John dropped dead on the street from a heart attack just before Thelma's first major films were released. Tragedy had already visited the family some years earlier, when their 7-year-old son William, that was Thelma's brother, was killed in a tragic accident. In 1929, Thelma was signed to a 2-year deal with the Hal Roach Studios in Culver City, where she would star in a number of Laurel and Hardy films, as well as 2 Marx Brothers comedies, Duck Soup and Monkey Business. Todd became highly regarded as a capable film comedian, starring opposite Buster Keaton, Charlie Chase and Harry Langdon.
I love you. Maybe it's better if I don't sing too, huh?
Yes.
All right, I'll play.
As an actor in serious drama, she appeared in the original 1931 version of The Maltese Falcon and the high seas drama Corsair.
Wall Street isn't a football field.
The latter was directed by Roland West, who was to be a pivotal figure in her career. Corsair wasn't well received at the box office, and West's decision to change his leading lady's name from Thelma Todd to Alison Lloyd didn't really stick. Fans wanted their screwball comedian to stay exactly as she was. The comedian's talent, looks and engaging personality made her a hit with fans. She was a regular in the burgeoning film magazine sphere, and her appearances with numerous beaux in the Hollywood nightclub scene were hot topics for the newspapers. It was, after all, Hollywood's golden era, and Thelma was one of its golden stars. But Thelma's private life was anything but golden. Her short marriage to a movie agent with underworld links was short-lived. Her new husband, Pat DiCicco, whom she married in 1932, was abusive. Neighbours at their Hollywood apartment reported alcohol-fueled rows. Just over a year later, she filed for divorce, changing her will to leave DiCicco only $1. This was to ensure he could not contest the will. Before divorce proceedings were finalised, and hoping to avoid the negative publicity, she travelled to London, where she made a movie with comedian Stanley Lupino. I have been unable to find out if she met with family there, or even made the trip across the water to see relatives in Ireland. But after this working trip, she went back to the US to stay with family in Lawrence. On her return to Hollywood, she buried herself in her work. She worked on numerous zany short comedies. Producer Hal Roach was hoping to tap into the success of Laurel and Hardy with a female duo, one sensible woman, the other a clown.
Listen, I'm going to get rid of this guy just as quick as I can. How? When he comes back, he's going to think I'm the toughest dame he's ever been out with. Give me some of that ginger ale.
Together with Zazu Pitts and later Patsy Kelly, they made over 40 such comedies.
Right off the jump. Feed him our food and fuss over him as though he amounted to something. Sorry, there's 100 like him in our hometown. We didn't have to come to New York to fall for a sap like him. Now listen, you're going to get rid of that palooka or make him declare his intentions. Furthermore, we got to get organized. Do we want to stay here plugging songs from 6 in the morning till 7 at night all out? And from now on, we must do everything we can to make Waltham's music department the biggest and the best in the country.
In 1934, Thelma entered a business partnership with former movie producer Roland West, opening a cafe and restaurant on the seafront between Malibu and Santa Monica at 17575 Pacific Coast Highway. Remember, Todd had worked with West on the film Corsair just a few years earlier. Thelma mused over how other Hollywood starlets who had their place in the spotlight get a little bit older and they're lost without a career to fall back on. She told reporters,
I decided I was not going to be one of these people. I wasn't going to mind if I gained weight or got wrinkles, because I could use my brain. And as long as I could use my head, it wouldn't matter how I looked.
Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe opened in the summer of 1934. It was one of the very first celebrity restaurants. Remember, this was 90 years before another Todd, Ken Todd, and that's no relation, and his wife, Lisa Vanderpump, opened a chain of eateries. Thelma once told a gossip columnist, Luella Parsons, about her inspiration for the cafe.
I've heard so much about the choice foods of the days preceding Prohibition, when eating was still a fine art. Always I read with great interest about the bon viveur of the gay 90s, when people dined with pomp and ceremony, before they became addicted to grabbing a sandwich, a slab of pie, and calling it a meal.
Thelma Todd moved into a flat above the restaurant, adjoining that of West. West owned a large house and several properties on the Pacific Palisades Hill, just above the restaurant. And of course this led to speculation about the relationship between the two. But more of that later. But it was Thelma's tragic demise a few days before Christmas in 1935, and the myths that surround it, which continue to this day, would transcend anything she achieved on screen. It would be one of Hollywood's great unsolved mysteries. Early Monday morning, on December the 16th, the actress was found dead in her car in a double garage a few hundred yards on the hill above the restaurant, where her maid, May Whitehead, found her slumped in the front seats of her powerful 12-cylinder Lincoln Phaeton. Detectives who visited the scene had already decided on the evidence before them that it was either a case of suicide or simply an accident. Case closed as far as they were concerned. Later, a pathologist confirmed their suspicions. But there were problems with the investigation, and gaps in the evidence started to emerge. Certainly, the newspapers didn't seem impressed with the police investigation. On the evening of Saturday the 14th, Thelma Todd attended a party, organised in her honour at the fashionable Hollywood establishment, the Trocadero, where she was a guest of Stanley Lupino and his daughter, Ida. Remember, they had worked together on a film in London. The Lupinos had, unbeknown to Thelma, asked her ex-husband Pat DiCicco to the event. According to them, he had blagged his way into the party, having explained that he and his ex-wife were on excellent terms and had recently dined out together. However, DiCicco arrived on the arm of another actress, Margaret Lindsay. At around 3:15 a.m, Thelma was driven home by chauffeur Ernest Peters. Roland West, meanwhile, had locked the doors of the restaurant and apartment, including deadbolting one of the outer doors. It was usual for Peters to walk Thelma to her apartment, up 2 flights of steps from the highway where he parked. But on this night, Thelma told him not to bother. The steps formed part of a pedestrian overpass that connected the restaurant and the residents of the Palisades to the beach. So, early Sunday morning was the last Peters, or anybody else for that matter, was to see Thelma before her body was found on Monday morning by her maid, May Whitehead, some 30 hours later. Once Thelma Todd's premature death became public, newspapers sensationalised it, hinting at foul play. The Daily Record's headline proclaimed, "Thelma Todd found dead, investigating possible murder." The Herald's cover story suggested that Todd's death was worthy of Edgar Allan Poe. If her death was accidental, it was as strange an accident as was ever conceived by the brain of Poe. The circumstances of Thelma's death were puzzling, and upon receiving the news, her mother, Alice Todd, shrieked,
My daughter has been murdered.
Whether Thelma's death was a suicide, accident, or murder rested with the police detectives. Thelma's face bore traces of blood, and droplets of blood were present inside the car and on the running board of her Lincoln car. According to the coroner, Thelma's death likely occurred around 12 hours before they found her body. But then, a few witnesses came forward to swear they'd seen or spoken to Thelma on Sunday afternoon when, according to the coroner, she would have already been dead. Thelma Todd's death evoked a massive outpouring of grief. Hundreds of mourners from all walks of life visited Pierce Mortuary, where Thelma's body was in view from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on December the 19th, 1935. Her co-star, Patsy Kelly, was said to have been so upset that she was under a doctor's care. Thelma's death devastated her other comedy co-star, Sazu Pitts, who had been out Christmas shopping with her a few days earlier. The sightings of Thelma on Sunday led to a multitude of theories, ranging from plausible to crackpot. Among the theories that have gained popularity over the years, even though unsubstantiated, is the rumour that New York mobster Lucky Luciano put pressure on Thelma to host gambling at the cafe. When Thelma said no, he had her killed. Another theory is that her ex-husband, Pat DiCicco, murdered Thelma. He had a history of violence against women and was linked to the mob, but they found no evidence against him. So let's recap with a brief timeline of events that weekend. Saturday, December the 14th. 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. approximately. Early evening. Thelma Todd leaves the Sidewalk Cafe together with her mother Alice and driver Ernest Peters. Roland West tells her to be home by 2 a.m. 2:05, she jokes. En route to the venue, Thelma asks Peters to stop at a florist and gives him money to buy a camellia for her lapel. 8 p.m. Thelma Todd arrives at the party at the Trocadero, held in her honour by Stanley and his daughter Ida Lupino. Peters leaves with Alice Todd to go to a market. Thelma is greeted by the Lupinos, with whom she had worked with in London the previous year. A chair is placed next to Thelma for the expectant arrival of DiCicco. Word spreads, however, that DiCicco has arrived with actress Margaret Lindsay. Lindsay had just appeared in 2 Warner films alongside Betty Davis. DiCicco is confronted by Todd on the dance floor later that evening, but he states he was joking when he got himself invited. Ida Lupino describes this as an altercation. Sunday, December the 15th, 1:50 a.m. Todd asks theatre impresario Sid Grauman to phone West at the cafe to state she was on her way home. 3:15 a.m. Todd eventually leaves, escorted to her car by friend and admirer Arthur Prince. 3:45 a.m. Peters watches as Todd climbs the steps to her apartment. Thelma Todd is not seen again until Monday, December the 16th. Between 10 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. approximately, May Whitehead, her maid, discovers her body in the garage. West states that he was informed around 10:15 a.m. Every aspect of Thelma Todd's final hours between 3:45 a.m. on Sunday morning and 10 a.m. Monday morning is purely speculation. In the days that follow, police investigators, the coroner and a grand jury tried to piece together the missing course of events. Now, however, I'd like to give some thoughts I have on the events. As I said earlier, I don't have any answers. But if you listen, you'll hear some points that are probably worth debating. As I've said, we all like a good mystery after all. Let's start with the findings of the police. West LA Police Captain Bert Wallace tells reporters before the inquest, "There is absolutely no evidence of foul play, and furthermore, there is no motive for any." A bold claim. He possibly did not find evidence of foul play, but how could he know about motive, or lack of motive? Especially as Thelma had been a recipient of blackmail threats in the months before. She was worried enough to have been photographed in the restaurant with a handgun and a guard dog. A number of people, including key witnesses, are allowed to enter and re-enter the garage as the investigation took place. The garage was dusty, as reported by police, yet no mention was made of footprints. Investigators only managed to find one fingerprint on the seat of Thelma's Lincoln, close to where her body lay. Just one.
Mae Whitehead, who was Thelma Todd's maid, came up here, parked her car, and then went to get Thelma's car, and it was parked in the right-hand garage here. And she found Thelma dead behind the wheel. The car wasn't running. She immediately went for help, and there was a subsequent police investigation. Now, the police, I think you would need to see the investigation notes, but I think they just assumed that it was accidental death, carbon monoxide poisoning. They reckon she had come up here, turned the car on to keep herself warm. Remember, it's the middle of December, which can be quite cold here in winter, and died sometime later. Of course, this was early hours of Sunday morning, so Sunday passed. Nobody really noticed her missing until the Monday morning when Mae Whitehead came to get her car. There's a few things about the police report which are sketchy to say the least. What I've seen of the police report, having assumed, or which would be very handy to them, to assume that it was accidental death. There was no real investigation. It was only when there was a grand jury convened that they really started to ask questions. But by that time, much of the evidence had been lost. So there's a few things that sort of occurred to me. There would have been some sort of footprints going in and out of the garage, but police investigators tramped all over the place, so that probably wasn't reliable as evidence. There's also the question of what way she came up here. To my mind, she definitely came up the road because it was well lit. There was a staircase, but it's quite a long staircase, and it was pitch black. She'd been out drinking. I don't think she would have went that way.
Having decided there was no foul play, all investigations were instigated with that premise. All interviews were conveniently concluded to suit Captain Bert Wallace's premise, as I shall explain later. Key witness statements were not thoroughly investigated as to their truthfulness. So let's briefly discuss what the police uncover. Roland West states he locked the doors of the cafe, including deadbolting one of them, even though he knew from Sid Grauman's phone call Thelma was on her way home. He says he is worried about prowlers. To me, that's a strange thing to do. If my wife were on her way home, I wouldn't go to such extremes, prowlers or not. What would you do in the circumstances? Thelma's maid, Mae Whitehead, tells the inquest that part of her job entailed picking up the large Lincoln Phaeton from the double garage each morning after it had been reversed in by one of the restaurant staff the night before. Questioned on Miss Todd's appearance in the car, she states her feet were not on the pedals. She was sitting upright, with her head slumped to one side. When shown a police photograph of the scene, she states,
She wasn't lying down that way when I saw her.
Smith alerts Roland West, and they go to the scene. West tells Whitehead to drive to the house above the garage and waken Rudolph Schaefer, who also manages the cafe. Schaefer tells the jury he is in bed with his wife when he is told by Whitehead of the scene in the garage below the house. He arrives at the garage at 11:15 a.m. A full hour has elapsed since West has arrived at the scene. West tells Schaefer to call the police. However, Schaefer goes to a printing shop in West LA, about 30 minutes away, as he says to eliminate any publicity right away until we have found out what it was all about. Now, this is a bizarre statement. Instead of being grilled in court as the obvious time lapses, he is then asked about the position of the body. He states Todd is slumped over, as in the police photograph. There was blood all over her mouth, and it ran down in the seat right where her head was. So, now we know the body has been moved. LA police officer Captain Bruce Clark arrives shortly after 12 noon. He states the body was lying in the middle of the seat with her head lying towards the driver's door. Now, the Lincoln has a bench front seat. From photographs taken at the scene, Todd was not sitting directly behind the steering wheel. If she had slumped over while directly behind the steering wheel, then her head and shoulders would have extended out through the driver's door, which we know from Whitehead was wide open. Whitehead already states her feet were not on the pedals. This is important because it questions Todd's ability to start and operate the car. Police decide fairly quickly that death is caused by carbon monoxide poisoning, either by accident or by suicide. The homicide squad are informed, but only visit the scene after the body is taken to the morgue. Most irregular. Captain Clark, meanwhile, sees that the ignition is in the on position. His officers drain over a gallon of petrol from the car, but there is still enough for the police to drive it down the road and back. West states that the car battery was flat, but there's no mention of a jump start. Maybe, like the jurors, we'll have to assume that that's what they did. Coroner Nance questions autopsy surgeon Dr. Wagner at great length on the effects of carbon monoxide and Todd's alcohol consumption, which he stated was 13/100th. Not enough to be very intoxicated. On examining her blood, he states that it contained between 75 and 80% carbon monoxide saturation, enough to cause death. He is unable to give a precise time of death. The coroner's jury renders the following verdict. Death seems to have been accidental, but we recommend further investigation by the proper authorities. The district attorney orders a grand jury, where the question of murder must be answered. Now things get interesting, and we will get a detailed questioning and testimony from two key witnesses. West, who has already testified to the coroner, and Chico, who had flown the coupe all the way to New York, leaving on the day his ex-wife's body was found, but not before he visits the scene at the garage. However, the grand jury transcript taken by a court stenographer has never been made public. Authors now rely on newspaper accounts from shorthand notes taken by court reporters. And as a former court reporter, I know that mistakes can creep into the copy, and not all that is said in the court is actually taken down. And it gets murky. As is the case today, editors often pick and choose the juiciest copy, with an eye-catching headline in order to sell newspapers. So, back to DeChico. A telegram raising his hasty departure is sent to Long Island, where he is holed up, requiring him to testify. It is most extraordinary, as a lead witness, or even a prime suspect if in fact it was murder, and nobody knew that for sure, he was allowed to leave in the first place. Of course, remember West LA Police Captain Bert Wallace's statement to the press before the inquest. He said, "There is absolutely no evidence of foul play, and furthermore, there is no motive for any." Really? To the skeptic, it all reeks of a bit of a cover-up. Let's make this tidy, and it will all go away. Several witnesses report seeing Thelma on the Sunday before she was found dead on the Monday morning. A drugstore clerk says she witnessed Todd enter a telephone booth at 4 p.m. Martha Ford, who knows her well, relays in detail her conversation she has with the actress around the same time. As we heard earlier, Martha Ford thinks it's another friend, Thelma, but Todd replies,
No, it's me, your hot toddy.
Authors question the use of the name Hot Toddy, a name Thelma dislikes, according to maid May Whitehead. Although Whitehead says Thelma did not like the nickname, Thelma herself used the name in a few comedy shorts she made with Zazu Pitts. According to the late Benny Drennan, who wrote a blog on Thelma for many years up until his death in 2022, Mickey Daniels called her Hot Toddy in the 1931 Boyfriends comedy Love Fever. Thelma was called Toddy throughout Sealskins, in which she called Zazu Pitts Pitsy. They evidently called each other Toddy and Pitsy all the time, and not just when they were making this film. If true, this would of course give more credence to the Martha Ford testimony. Charles H. Smith, the occupant of the room directly above the garage, was interviewed by reporters. Smith says he closed the cafe at 2 a.m, went home and read in bed until 3:30 a.m, when he fell asleep. He states, "During all that time in the apartment, I heard no unusual sound or anything to make me think anything out of the ordinary had happened. The wind was blowing noisily, and the surf was pounding with unusual violence, which might possibly have prevented me from hearing anything." I find that statement curious. When I visited the garage in 2024, a number of surfers were enjoying the waves that day. When I sat at the garage, I noticed it was eerily quiet. I certainly could not hear the surf, and I couldn't hear the traffic from the busy highway below.
And this garage and the house above was owned by Roland West. There was a guy above who was living, see the small windows just above the garage? He had an apartment in there. I can't understand why he didn't hear that car starting up. It would have been rumbling on for, I don't know, it depends how much petrol was in the thing. It could have been 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour. Who knows?
LA Weather reports for that day state the weather was mild. At the inquest, driver Ernest Peters is asked, "The weather was good and the night was clear?" "Very good. The wind was blowing." But with only floorboards between his bedroom floor and the garage, I find it hard to believe he didn't hear anything, such as a 12-cylinder sports car starting up. Roland West, in his testimony to the inquest, states that the car was very loud on startup, and in addition, the plaster had been removed from the garage walls. Even less soundproofing. A pattern seems to emerge. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. People who did claim having seen Thelma on the Sunday before she was found dead start to water down their claims. It was common knowledge Hollywood studio fixers like Eddie Mannix could make things go away. Remember the time lapse in contacting the police. Ample time for Mannix and his partner, Howard Strickling, to do what they did best: interfere in proceedings to ensure an outcome to best preserve the studio's whiter than white image. But there was more. The two main witnesses, or suspects, if there was any suspicion of foul play, which there was, prompting an inquest and a grand jury hearing, Roland West and Pat DiCicco should have been top of the list. At the grand jury, 18 jurors listened to the case in closed session. As stated earlier, transcripts of the grand jury deliberations were never released to the public. Witnesses were, however, free to talk to the press, including one, Jewel Carman. Jewel Carman was a former movie star of the silent era. In a statement to the police, she also claimed she saw Todd driving her Lincoln, together with a dark, handsome man, in Los Angeles on the Sunday afternoon, the day before Todd was found dead. At the grand jury, however, she claims to be unwell and on the verge of a nervous collapse. She asks a friend to redact her statement, saying instead she knew now she was mistaken. What made her change her mind? Or who? So, who was Jewel Carman? Carman was married to Roland West. But was she? She lived in West's villa overlooking the garage and Todd's cafe restaurant below. Almost every biographer states that West was in a relationship with Todd. Numerous press articles talk of West being Todd's love interest. Yes, the two lived above the restaurant, but in separate apartments, according to West. A heavy wooden door divided the sleeping and living arrangements. West was supposed to have entered a relationship with Todd during the making of his film Corsair in 1931. A year later, however, Todd elopes with DiCicco and is married to him for less than 2 years before breaking it off. Although they admit to knowing of each other, West maintains he never met DiCicco. DiCicco says he never met West. Well, I find that most unlikely. The two exchange brief glances outside the courtroom, but don't actually acknowledge each other. If they admit to knowing each other, wouldn't they at least make some sign of acknowledgement outside the court? Perhaps they were advised not to. A former employee at Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, insists that DeCicco and West did know each other. DeCicco was a regular customer when he was married to Thelma Todd. During Thelma Todd's time in Hollywood, she is often linked with seemingly eligible suitors, who she is seen attending the city's more glamorous establishments, such as the Brown Derby, the Trocadero, the Coconut Grove, or the Chateau Marmont. The Los Angeles Daily Record makes several references to Thelma attending nightclubs with Kemp Kane Perot, an attorney and leading underworld figure. The intimidating 6'2" Perot was considered the boss of municipal politics in Los Angeles.
You'll drop dead when you see who it is.
Perot reportedly socialised with the city's criminal leaders at his private apartment at the city's newest opulent hotel, the Biltmore. Gambling was rife in the area, and in 1933, Prohibition had been repealed. It was a hodgepodge of shady deals, money laundering, blackmail and extortion, a perfect scenario for cops on the take and corrupt politicians. Hollywood's main brothel madam was a woman called Anne Forrester, who enjoyed the protection of Los Angeles Mayor Frank Shaw. Elected in 1933 and recalled in 1938, Shaw is believed to have been the most corrupt mayor in Los Angeles history. Shaw enabled many of the nefarious dealings in LA, from the DA to the ordinary detective and patrolman. It was important to keep a lid on things, as long as nobody rocked the money boat, illegal or otherwise. Everyone was happy. And this was true for the powerful movie studio bosses, who did everything within their power to protect their interests, most notably their biggest stars. Spencer Tracy's alcoholism, Errol Flynn and Charlie Chaplin's attraction to teenage girls, and when Jean Harlow, Judy Garland, Lana Turner and countless other MGM actresses found themselves pregnant out of wedlock, hasty abortions were arranged. Murder, it was said, cost a little bit more to cover up. Of course, DeCicco moved in these circles. Known about town as an actor's agent, he had a history of violence against women. After the breakup with Todd, with whom he was abusive, he married 17-year-old heiress Gloria Vanderbilt, who described his brutality towards her in her memoir. On the morning Thelma is found dead, DeCicco arrives at the scene, driving across town from his office at the movie studio where he works. He is blocked from entering the garage by a policeman, but says he slipped through another door. "I wanted to see proof with my own eyes," he tells a reporter. Slipped through another door? There were only two doors side by side in the garage, so he either ignores the patrolman's attempt to block him, or, as most likely, used his influence with the police brass to walk in before the investigation has even been completed. By now the scene is well and truly tampered with. If DeCicco's fingerprints or footprints had been at the scene, they were now inadmissible as evidence. Let's take a closer look at Roland West. I've always been curious about West's life and his relationship with the women in his life. He was a successful scriptwriter and producer, from early stage success to films such as The Bat, with its use of a bat graphic in a circled spotlight, which was to be the inspiration for the Batman character in modern culture. West's large mansion, overlooking the restaurant with views over the Pacific Ocean, contained secret rooms and corridors. He is a true man of mystery. He is married, yet he is not married. He has no children. His nephew later in life describes West as sneaky and unpopular. He is involved in the gambling world through his lifelong friend Joe Skank, the chairman of 20th Century Fox, a notorious gambler who in his own diary show would win or lose thousands in a day. When Skank is found guilty of tax evasion, West is named in the case. But perhaps Roland West is misunderstood. Perhaps he is an innocent soft touch for various money laundering schemes that would ultimately benefit his more unscrupulous pals. Later in life he marries Lola Lane, one of the Lane singing sisters. He is the fourth of her 5 husbands. After his death in 1952, he leaves most of the estate to Lola. However, he leaves $1 to each of 2 other women, so they won't contest the will. Now, why would he need to do that? So many women with a seemingly anomalous connection to West. So what if, and it's just my suggestion here, Roland West was gay? If you think about that for a moment, how would that totally change the narrative? That knowledge would give some of the more unscrupulous characters mentioned earlier some serious leverage over proceedings and perhaps eventual outcome. Studio bosses were known to have moved heaven and earth to hide a star's homosexuality or lesbianism. There were many cases of fixed marriages, known as lavender marriages. Lavender marriages were a solve in part for moral clauses issued by studios at the time, identifying Hollywood couples who tied the knot to cloak their sexuality is mostly based on speculation. My hunch is that West and Jewel Carmen may have been involved in such an arrangement. In 1939, Carmen sues West for over $600 a month, stating they had lived together for 10 years. West tells the court the couple were not actually married. After 1930, Carmen lives with her female spiritualist Mother Gray, long into her retirement from public life. Almost every article written about the couple claim West and Todd were having an affair, but there is little evidence in the way of personal testimony for this. Certainly, neither ever confirmed it, and West went out of his way in court to say that Thelma was his best friend, as well as business partner.
Now remember, Patsy, an air hostess is always on her dignity, the customer is always right, and service with a smile. Did you get what I said? I've been getting it every night for a week.
Thelma's friend Lena Basquet stated at the time that Thelma's personal love life was in a good place. However, this was in relation to press questions as to whether or not she may have committed suicide. Lena made headlines on the day of Thelma's inquest with her divorce from boxer Jack Dempsey's trainer, Teddy Hayes. Thelma was comfortable in the company of homosexual and lesbian friends. She was often pictured with Jean Mallon, one of the first openly gay performers in Hollywood at the time. Patsy Kelly, who was Todd's sidekick in the Hal Roach comedy shorts, was openly lesbian. Mallon had a brief but colourful life. His marriage to Faye Hillman lasted just a year. In August 1933, Mallon, aged just 25, was killed in a freak automobile accident. He had just performed a farewell performance at the Ship Cafe in Venice, California. He somehow managed to reverse his car into the sea after selecting the wrong gear. Jimmy Forlenza, who gossip columns referred to as Malin's close friend, survived the accident, as did another passenger, the aforementioned Patsy Kelly. But back to Roland West. None of my speculations in any way suggest he murdered Thelma, but if he was hiding a homosexual secret, and the word gay meant something quite different then, he would be susceptible to coercion. In the days that followed Thelma's death, he was often photographed accompanying her mother to the court hearings and at the funeral. Thelma's mother, Alice, like her daughter, seemed, well, comfortable in his company. Hollywood fixer Eddie Mannix's appearance at these events was most telling. Interestingly, and to many onlookers' surprise, one of the named guests at Thelma's funeral was Kent Kane Perot. Could he have been Thelma's tall, dark mystery man?
You'll drop dead when you see who it is.
Remember, let's keep a lid on this thing. Don't rock the boat. It's best this thing is seen as an accident for everybody concerned. As the grand jury dragged on over the Christmas and New Year, there was a growing disquiet amongst the jurors, some of whom wanted to spend time with their families. One is even excused duty. Studio mogul Sid Grauman grumbles at having to testify, saying he just called into the Trocadero that night on the way home to get some supper. This is all very convenient for the fixers. And, as luck would have it, on the 9th of January 1936, screen idol and dubbed the world's greatest lover, John Gilbert, dies of a heart attack. Thelma is replaced on the front pages by Gilbert. And eventually the grand jury, finding no evidence of murder, confirms the finding of the earlier inquest. That is, death caused by carbon monoxide poisoning. The death appears to be an accident. So what we are left with is what could now be described as a perfect mystery. Maybe it was an accident, as some serious authors believe. The inquest concludes that the deceased's death was caused by carbon monoxide poisoning, but recommended further investigation. Maybe it was suicide, but from testimony given by Thelma Todd's friends, both the inquest and the grand jury refute this. Only the initial police report suggests an accident, but with possible suicide indications. But then why would she go to the bother of shopping around for 100 presents for friends and family and then not leave a suicide note? Why did she not use Wes's unlocked humpmobile car sitting next to her Lincoln? Why were the garage lights not on? Maybe it was murder or manslaughter. Various scenes and motives have been put forward, including the involvement of mobster Lucky Luciano, who has her killed because she refuses to turn the top floor of the cafe into a gambling den. Luciano, however, was not even in LA at that time. Or that West killed her and made it look like suicide. To me, it's a death badly investigated and badly explained away by the authorities because of bad practice and, some would say, gross negligence. So what we have is the paradox of Thelma Todd, a wild-living, heavy drinker with the dark side, often seen in bad company. Or the godly, church-going woman who buys robes for the choir and personally packs food baskets for the poor. Someone who, as studio boss Hal Root says, is the most popular person on the lot, who never forgets a name and always has a good word for everyone. Mark Twain once wrote, "The research of many commentators have already thrown much darkness on this subject, and it is probable that if they continue, we shall soon know nothing about it at all." In the months I spent investigating this story, I came across one little bit of information regarding the mysterious Roland West. His early years were spent living and working on the stage in Cleveland with his Aunt Cora Van Tassel. West's mother was Van Zeemer, West's real name. He still referred to himself as Roland Van West in court documents. Almost exactly 10 years before Thelma Todd's death, Cora was found dead. The cause of death was listed as illuminating gas poisoning. Accidental. In other words, carbon monoxide poisoning. Terror at midnight, blood on the ground, beneath the sodium light, a new scandal in town. Twist of fate, jealous disarray, where the sidewalk ends, this grim cabaret. Cry of the city, cry of the city. Cry of the city, cry of the city.